We're spending billions of dollars and asking students to invest thousands of hours learning rote math and developing skills for math that we don't even use in reality as adults. Machines can do this kind of computation in seconds, and we're calling this preparing our kids for the future. It's not that at all. Today, my guest is Ted Dintersmith. You might know him from Most Likely to Succeed, a wonderful documentary that's been out for about 10 years, or his book, What School Could Be. He's on the podcast today to talk about two new creative projects, Multiple Choice, which is a documentary doing community screenings all over the nation, and a new book, which I love, called Aftermath, which is highly recommended to ruckus makers. So Ted had a wake-up call when his son was in middle school, and this quote-unquote innovative school couldn't accommodate an interesting and meaningful sort of project that his son wanted to complete. And the feedback that the school gave Ted was, if we made this exception for one student, we'd have to make exceptions for others. Meanwhile, that same student was stuck taking pottery for a second year in a row on campus and learning how to add some weirdness in to get good grades in that class. It just doesn't make sense. And now with AI engines writing better than most journalists can do and solving complex problems instantly, we're training an entire generation to be duplicative inside the marketplace with technology that costs just $20 a month. The Rand Corporation found that state-mandated high school math exams reflected 0% deeper learning. 0%. We're not just failing our kids, we're actively preparing them for unemployment. Think about that. But what if math could be revealing instead of rote? What if students learned estimation and decision making and data literacy and game theory instead of all the stuff we forgot from high school algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, right? Whether the kid's college bound or not, there's real world math skills that Ted discusses in Aftermath that every kid, and even as an adult, I enjoyed going through the book and thinking about math as well. So I'm Danny Bauer, and this is Better Leaders, Better Schools, the original ruckus cast for visionary school leaders who want to do school different, meaning they want to reimagine the educational experience, even within a traditional system, so that we create campus experiences worth showing up for. Thanks to ruckus makers just like you, this show ranks in the top 1% of all shows worldwide. So once again, thanks for listening. And we'll be right back with the main content after a quick message from our show sponsors. For over 30 years, ODP Business Solutions has helped schools transform from whiteboards to smartboards. Why? Because when you get the right tools, everyone wins. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to revolutionize your school's learning spaces. It's odpbusiness.com/education. This episode of Better Leaders, Better Schools is brought to you by Play Piper. At Piper, we believe that STEM doesn't have to feel out of reach. Too many kids love gaming, but give up on science and engineering because school doesn't spark their interest. That's where Piper comes in. Hands-on STEM kits designed to turn curiosity into confidence and keep the pipeline of future innovators flowing strong. You can learn more at playpiper.com. That's playpiper.com. Over 1 million teachers rely on IXL because it's empowering, it helps them make better decisions with reliable data, and it adapts instruction based on student performance. You can get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. And Ted, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
I am really excited to dig into, your latest book, Aftermath, right here. So that's Ruckus Maker approved for sure. You sent me to the sort of advanced screening of the multiple choice documentary that you have as well. and looking forward to digging into both of those. But I think where I'd like to start, if you could bring us to a moment in time when your kids were in middle school and that served for you as a wake up call. What was going on there?
Yeah, I was trusting for a lot of the way, and then when you get to middle school, when kids get to middle school, that's when we get serious about learning. And,
Mm,
there was a particular episode where the school announced they were doing a brown bag lunch because they had brand new initiatives to prepare kids for life. And my immediate reaction was, "That's great." And as I thought about it, I said, like, "Why is that a new initiative? I mean, isn't that what school should be about, preparing kids
yeah.
for life?" And I went, and it was, kind of what you might expect, which is, once a month, the gym teacher would put up slides of car accidents or tar-infested lungs and, caution kids about certain things. I didn't think that was a bad idea, but it really got me thinking about what the heck is going on in school. And I kept a running list for the next few weeks of what my kids were working on.
Mm,
It was like irrelevant, beneficial, and lots of irrelevance, almost nothing beneficial. But I also started seeing things that I thought were downright harmful.
mm,
And with that, I said, like, is this just this school? Well, it clearly wasn't. I started meeting people, reading books and articles, visiting schools. I realized it's the education model, and it's a model that it was intentionally designed to prepare young adults for lifetimes of rote work and to get
mhm,
rid of the very traits that might disrupt an assembly line. We don't want creativity or curiosity or audacity or leadership. We want kids with minds dumbed down so that they can handle the same basic job day in and day out for a lifetime. And you just say like, whoa, we don't want that anymore. Certainly, that ought to be obvious to everybody. Certainly. It turns out it isn't. But anyway, that changed my life.
yeah, those 3 columns are interesting too, because I wonder what would make it in the beneficial column for you, and then, the other 2, especially one being called harmful, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? How did you sort of sort those out?
Well, a specific example would make the point is our son was had to take some sort of art class in middle school. And so his first year, he signed up for his top 3 choices, didn't get any of them, and was, put into a pottery class, which he had no enthusiasm for. And he did that. He came home one day and said, I think I can get a good grade if I just do something normal and add some weirdness to it. And they kind of like that. And then the second year rolls around, same thing, same top 3 choices, pottery again. Look, oh my gosh, okay. And, he sort of went to the school and said, "Hey, we've got where we live, we had a little stream." And he said, "Could I build a bridge over this stream and spend time on the aesthetics of beautiful bridges and the
Hmm,
what makes for a structurally sound bridge?" And this was a school most parents thought was a great school, and really committed teachers. I never go after teachers; they are dedicated. But
yeah,
the answer from the administration of that school was, "We couldn't make an exception here." Because if we made an exception for one student, we'd have to make an exception for others. And I'm
hmm,
like, wait, a kid proposes something interesting and wants to go deep with it? And that is something you can't accommodate, something you discourage? And so that is it, right? Is it, do we invite kids to identify projects and initiatives they believe are important, go deep on them, develop important skills, and feel that sense of purpose of accomplishing something that makes their world better? Do we do
hmm,
that? Or do we say, "No, I'm sorry, that would be a bad precedent to set." So take pottery, pottery 3.0 or whatever, and you realize that's not a school or a set of the teachers don't want to do that. But when you
hmm,
hold schools
hmm,
accountable to high stakes exams, when you obsess around the college placements, that leads you down a path of we want all kids to prep for the same tests that define academic achievement in a world where machines do everything on those tests perfectly.
yeah. And that's a common thread, right, in the book and in the documentary, sort of what is what's school for? What's the purpose? And if we're optimizing for great test scores, we seem to be missing the point. But I'm curious, the ruckus maker who's listening, they believe in my point of view, right? This
Yeah.
idea of do school different, which is making shifts from old, broken, traditional ways of educating to new, different, and creative, and also reimagining the education experience within the confines of the system in which it exists, so kids are excited to show up on campus. And you clearly point out, right? Like policymakers, politicians have a lot of power in this game that we call education. And I'm just curious, like what you'd say, yeah, to the ruckus maker listening or watching, who might feel a bit jaded or pessimistic. You know, later I'm going to ask you about how they can be the lead ant, right?
The lead ad,
But
perfect, yeah. Well, it's part of the reason why I've committed so much effort to films, because if
yeah,
you can be part of, and I'm not the director of these films, so the credit for their power goes to the directors. But, Most Likely to Succeed was a very upbeat film, and
yeah,
people loved watching it. And as you know, it premiered at Sundance, a super high
hmm,
quality film. I turned down Netflix and we went directly to communities. And we've now
yeah,
done with that film easily 10,000 community screenings. And so a ruckus maker could bring that film to their community, show other people, and begin to invite people to be supportive, to celebrate those dedicated teachers who are doing things that are a bit different from same old, same old. And I think the power of a film, I mean, it scales, right? I mean, I could only give somebody talks. Books are great, but very hard to get books to reach millions of people, which that film reached. And
mm,
it sets the stage for a really vibrant discussion. And we saw that again and again. People would bring small groups, very large groups together. They'd watch the film. And we felt like maybe if they spent 15, 20 minutes afterward talking about it, that'd be great. Oftentimes they'd
hmm,
spend an hour and a half talking about it.
yeah,
And that film was more suggestive. I mean, it was over 10 and a half years ago that it premiered at Sundance. And I am proud if people watch, and we'll put the link in your show notes because it's now anybody can watch it. It's online for free. But the opening 15 minutes show the path of technology, and it sort of reflects my perspective. But I think we did a great job of anticipating because it shows machines getting better, humans at chess, and then getting better than humans at Jeopardy. But and it, a film that was in the can in 2014 shows computers writing better prose than journalists. This was long before OpenAI or the what was formed or the AI engines were out there. We showed this is where it's headed, and this, we suggest, has profound implications for what skills and mindsets young adults need to make their way forward in life. And the film's not a here's what you have to do, shove it down your throat film. It's not our attitude, right? We try to showcase things we think are powerful, you know, learning experiences where kids can't wait to be in school, where you look at what they're doing and you say they are getting good and important skills. It is helping them foster valuable mindsets. Teachers are trusted to teach to their passions and expertise. We showcase these bright spots and then try to get them out to people and say, what do you think? Wouldn't you like to do more of that? And the
mhm,
thing that's changed, I'd say there have been two major developments since that film came out, which is now it premiered in January of 2015. First, I'd say we had a very detrimental period when COVID hit. And and it didn't have to be detrimental. What people say, oh, schools will never change. Well, in March of 2020, schools changed everything in a matter of
right,
days. Schools can
yeah,
change if people feel urgency. But after 1 to 2 really disrupted years with a lot of and my heart went out to educators having to make decisions. I mean, it was impossible to make a decision where everybody in your school community said, bravo, that's exactly what, like it was no win situation for educators. And parents saw at home how hard it was to keep kids on task with material they had no interest in, where I think parents
right,
were looking at it saying, why are they doing this? But I think that potential path to real transformation got squashed by the NAEP scores that came out. And we could talk about
mhm,
that in detail, but as kids were coming out of COVID, the National Center for Education Statistics does this poorly sampled nations report card. They did that in the spring of 2022, released the scores in the fall of 2022 when we were starting to get our footing again, where there was a potential to really innovate. And every headline talked about the catastrophic scores and the massive amounts of learning loss. I mean, serious people would write that we had lost 20 years of progress on scores given to 9 and 13-year-olds, which that is a bit of a head scratcher. And, in my book, this is one of the reasons I wrote my book, is that the reality is the policymakers and the journalists that were obsessing about that lack math literacy. I mean, they are math ignorant. And the reality was they were tiny declines on multiple choice questions. The biggest decline was 8th grade math, which is 1.6% decline on their scale, not mine. On, for the most part, math no adult ever uses. I had a hard time seeing why that was a catastrophe. And I think the second thing, though, that in some ways is imparting real energy in rethinking school is every other day, maybe every day, you see a headline that says college grads may be unemployable. AI is coming. It's incredibly good already. It gets better by the day. And if you go through 16 years or more of school trained to do assignments, you are essentially duplicative with what ChatGPT or Perplexity or, Claude, there are a whole range of these things that just are so good. You're duplicative in skill set with what an AI engine does for free or $20 a month. Or, it's like, why would I hire somebody if I can just prompt engineer something? And so that, I think, is not great news, because I fear for how it's going to roll out and affect so many people. But I think it does make communities, families, educators far more receptive to saying we need to do something different.
Yeah, we have to do school different. In aftermath, I don't remember the reporter's name, but I think, to your point about reading those NAEP scores, I think it was a LA Times journalist who said the headline was like, well, essentially, the only thing these scores taught us is that journalists don't know how to read the scores or make sense of the data. And, they kind of messed with the scale to make it look a lot more alarming and this kind of thing, and that's that piece. And I don't know if it was the book, the documentary, or just where my head was last night, but I think one of the points that we're making too is, schools reward the right answer, so to speak, the single right answer that could be easy to grade and automated sort of from an assessment side in a billion-dollar industry, versus rewarding students for asking curious and creative and interesting questions, which, if you don't want to be replaced by AI, you need those skills: leadership, innovation, curiosity, collaboration, versus what's the one single right answer, something factual you could look up and ChatGPT can answer for you in a millisecond. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I've been itching to write a book about math. And I just mentioned how the NAEP scores and the gross, I think irresponsibility in how those scores were interpreted prompted me. But also around that time, I read an interview with and he's an unbelievably nice person who's well-intentioned, but the head of the Gates Foundation's education initiative, who had just launched a $1 billion initiative to increase high school algebra scores. And the quote was that math is unique among all disciplines because in math, there is always one right answer.
hmm,
And my response to that was, he doesn't see the full power of math. And so I write an entire book, and most of the book is uplifting, interesting, written in the style of Freakonomics, with the ideas and interesting ways it comes into and influences your world. But the math that really matters in life does not have one right answer.
hmm,
It invites creative, interesting approaches that draw on math and logic, but also encourage you to think big in terms of how you might go at it. And so, like my opening chapter is estimation. Our world is
right.
awash with numbers that are gross estimates. And knowing how those estimates are produced, what the margins of errors or confidence intervals are, how seriously to take them, and oftentimes making sure you don't lock in on the wrong number and make a potentially catastrophic mistake, seems like an important skill for adults
Yeah.
to have. But instead, adults spend all their time on arcsecants or the, definition of an irrational number or side angle side, or a whole bunch of things that some people respond to, resonate with, do well on. Many people don't. But if your phone does it perfectly and you're never going to use it as an adult, it begs the question, why? Why
Mm.
is this thousands of hours of time in, grade 8 through 12 on math adults don't use, your smartphone does perfectly? And the answer is it's easy to test. It works to the advantage of the testing companies and to the serious detriment of students, communities, and civil society.
And you also argue too, how the colleges benefit in terms of being able to sort and rank and say, okay, this university is so selective, right? We can only accept so many people, and an entire game in itself as well. Yeah, but I really enjoyed the book. I was a math major entering college. I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I left an English major. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. I don't know which one's more important though. Okay, I'll let you and the other listeners judge. Reason number one, math. So straight A's, right? Like high GPA. Then I get to university and math becomes real for me, and it's really challenging. Uh, and it's cumulative in terms of the assessment, so it's building on the knowledge, which is important. But I find when I go to the TA sort of discussion sections, I'm getting lost and I'm drowning. And even when I schedule a one-on-one with the TA, I don't feel any better about my position. And I get my first C in my life because I suck at this level of math. Now, the second reason I become an English major too is while that's happening, Ted, I am taking English 101 and Introduction to Poetry, right? Now, my professor is a blind professor. He has every poem that we do in class memorized. It's in
Whoa.
his bones, it's in his heart. And he's able to teach us, and it's coming alive and it's dramatic, right? And one of the assignments he gave us was to do a spoken presentation of a poem of our choice, and I did "Pose the Raven," and it spellbound him and my classmates. So first of all, I get this great affirmation from this incredible professor in my reading of the poem. Secondly, I look out to the sea of beautiful women in this class, right?
There we go.
And I'll tell you, Ted, right? Those ladies versus the guys I saw coming out of Altgeld Hall, which before it was trendy and cool, big glasses, pocket protectors, plaid shirts. I'm like, all right, which path do I choose here? And I chose the poetry. But, some of that's tongue in cheek. The reality, I chose English because there was no single right answer.
Yeah.
When we read a poem or we read, an essay or whatever it was in English, as long as you could argue your point and back it up with data, right? To make your claims and justify the claims. Professors seem to think that this was a good way of doing it. And I had a lot of fun arguing interesting positions. And so I became, an English teacher because of that. But this is my long way of saying aftermath helped me fall back in love with aspects of math after that traumatic, like you suck in university decades ago, because it's real world, because it's application. And you said the book starts off with estimation. It does, but I was really interested in decision making because that's something we talk out a lot in our leadership community. And game theory, that's just something I'm interested in. And
Yeah.
you cover those topics too.
We're kindred spirits in the set. As an undergrad, I did go to college, but I spent way too much time at school. But I started out as a physics major, which
Right.
in college is a lot of complicated math, and I was just getting burned out on it. And
Mhm.
so I took, as a sophomore, a couple English courses, and I said, "Oh, I get to read the romantic poets and Victorian novels
Yeah.
and everything. Like,
Yeah.
I get to do this." And so I ended up actually double majoring. And then I went on and got a master's and PhD and a master's in physics, PhD in engineering. But, spending an entire career in technology businesses, far and away the most important aspect of all those courses, massive
Mhm.
numbers of math courses, were those English courses. And it was
Mhm.
dealing with complex material, and it was being able to communicate clearly. And I often wonder, and I mean, in your class, you would have been doing this, but I mean, so often you hear people say, well, like ChatGPT, they're not thinking, they can just put in a prompt and it gives you an essay and that's that. And they didn't even think. And it just begs for, where did we lose track of person to person discussion?
Yeah.
It's like writing is a means of communicating your point of view, but so is a direct conversation. I'm not talking to you today by looking at my phone and seeing what ChatGPT tells me to do. And your ruckus makers, they could say whether I make sense or not, but this is authentic. I mean, they're hearing me. They're not
Right.
hearing AI generate some lame version of me. And I feel like if in fact everybody's writing could be elevated, which I think is absolutely the case, doesn't that give us the window and the opportunity and arguably the imperative to put more weight on in-person discussion, to debate, to thoughtful exchange, to constructive criticism? Because I'll tell you, I spent a lot of years in business. Not once did any of the groups I was involved with make a major decision based on, oh, we got an email, we're doing it. You get an email that was, or back in the day, a typewritten memo, but you get something in writing that caused you to think. And then you say, let's talk about it. That's what we do. That's how people,
Right.
that's how organizations operate. And when you're talking about it, the person who sent that note is not looking at their phone. They either can articulate their rationale for a course of action you might not have taken otherwise, or it goes nowhere. And to me, that's just the point here, is that it's not as though AI replaces our ability to communicate and convey important, interesting ideas that inform or move or persuade. It's a tool. But at the end of the day, let's not let ourselves off the hook from talking to each other. Heaven
Yeah.
forbid.
Exactly. In aftermath, I'd love for you to define the difference between rote and revealing math, because
Yeah.
that's a big point there.
Well, rote is, I think, essentially one right answer. I mean, it's the things in school you drill on it again and again. It's interesting, right? For most likely to succeed, we interviewed a lot of very expensive SAT tutors. And what we heard from them over and over again was that the single best tip they could give a student preparing for an SAT or an ACT was, if you come across a question that's hard, skip it.
Yeah.
If this is going to take you several minutes to figure out, you run the risk of missing the last 10 questions on the test. It is not worth it. So skip anything hard that actually prompts you to think deeply about it. And the Rand Corporation, I mean, oddly, with the billions and billions of dollars we spent to produce data on math scores, just one measly organization, the Rand Corporation, looked at how much deeper learning is reflected in state-mandated high school math exams. 0%.
Yeah, you said 0%. That was
0%.
shocking. Yeah.
Not a bunch or most or some, 0%. And I feel for and admire math teachers who have a classroom of, you can have 35 kids in a class and you're trying to get them excited about, any of these topics, right? Like, how do you get kids excited about side angle side when they don't really see its relevance? And you realize what they end up doing, right, is to figure out a few things that they think will populate these tests. It's a drill on them so much that you can do it in your sleep. It's second nature. And that's how you get these exams, right? I can do 35 questions in 45 minutes and not make mistakes and get through them all. And it's okay, but where in the real world do you face that kind of rote math? I mean, it's like it's all integrated in your phone or in applications or whatever. And the revealing math are these nuanced, interesting ideas that help you make sense of your world. A different example, we talked about estimation, but what is the difference between correlation and causation? That is unbelievably important. And so, to circle back on something we talked about a few minutes ago, are high school algebra scores correlated some definition of success later in life? I mean, for instance, if you said more kids getting into college, yeah, high school algebra scores are correlated with more kids getting into college. High school algebra scores are undoubtedly correlated with higher first-year GPA. I think Sudoku scores are also highly correlated with those. And it's like the underlying cause, right, is how well off, how educated, how much money the parents have, what sort of home situation, how many resources their school have. There are a whole bunch of things that lead to higher algebra scores that also lead to those narrow definitions of success later in life. And if you don't understand how to see your way through hollow correlations versus meaningful causation, you will do things like spend $1 billion to boost high school algebra scores on math that almost no adult uses. And you will
Yeah.
continue to say, we need to do this stuff that adults don't use. And oh, well, what the heck? If kids can't interpret the numbers that come their way, if kids don't have the data literacy skills to make sense of studies, if kids don't know how to make important, I mean, what could be a more important thing to equip a high school graduate with than the ability to make sound decisions, understanding how risks play into it, understanding the power of creating alternatives? It's like, in what universe should arc sequence win over making good, responsible decisions? To me, it's just like that's evident, right? Except the testing organizations throw up their hands when it comes to kids make sound decisions. You know, how do you begin to standardize tests? Can kids come up with creative ways to estimate something they care about? It's
Yeah.
like, doesn't work for testing, but it's essential in life. And that's the point of the book. What do we care more about?
Yeah. Yeah. What are we optimizing for?
Yeah, yeah,
That context piece is so interesting too. I think it was in the book where it talked about students from a lower socioeconomic background crushed an exam question on tipping, right? And students that were from a more affluent, background actually struggled with it.
yeah,
But the context was, mom, dad, uncle, auntie, whoever might be working in those situations, and so it was sort of culturally taught like this is how to do a tip because their lives, depend on that. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a heartbreaking, story to share, but I felt like I needed to do it. And so after those NAEP scores came out, I scrambled to see if I could set up a call with top people at the National Center for Education and Statistics. And again, unbelievably well-intentioned people who care enormously about kids and education and their futures. But when we got into it, I realized they had no idea that they were really essentially clueless about the math behind these tests. And when I pushed them
mhm,
on the fact that the practice questions, which I assume were reflective of what was on, I didn't take the test, but I could look at the practice questions. And I said, like, look at these. We could walk around the National Mall in DC and ask 1,000 people how much of this math they're using. And the answer would be none, right? None.
right.
And the response was kind of like this. It was like, that's very interesting because, a few years ago, we had a question on the exam that required test takers to calculate tips on a restaurant bill, which I actually think is, should be something we could all do. And she said, what flummoxed us was that the low income kids did better on that question than the rich kids.
Mm,
And so we
mm,
did some focus groups. And what we learned is that many of the low income kids had a parent or an older sibling that were helping put food on their home table by working in restaurants. So those tip percentages, getting that right was important to their life. And lo and behold, they did better on that question than the rich kids who just like tossed in a credit card or had their parent pay for it. And I said, don't you think that tells us a big, powerful story about what we should be doing in math class and making it
mm.
directly related to kids and their futures? And, I have another anecdote, if you don't mind. Years ago, I did a learning walk through Newark schools with Ed Burns, who was a co-writer of The Wire. And I tell you, anybody who cares about education, watch season 4 of The Wire. I would argue the best TV series ever made, and season 4 is in the Baltimore public schools. And
I
the
have
great
to
thing is,
pause you on that just for a
yeah, yeah,
second
yeah.
because when I lived in Scotland, Anna, who was our neighbor below us, she and Roger were like the mayor of our little tenement, and they took us in, supported us like family, and they were so lovely. But they told me The Wire was their favorite American show, number one. Two, that it was absolutely Shakespearean, right? And three, they had to watch it with subtitles on so they could understand what was being said. So that was just fun, right? They were
Yeah,
Scottish and yeah, they
It
loved The
it
Wire.
was it was fun. And, Ed, it turns out, just like the character in the series Prez was a former policeman,
Mm,
something came up and ended up switching gears and teaching in Baltimore public schools and teaching math. You see in the series, and I wanted to know from Ed, was this pure fiction or was this based on what happened? The series shows what happened with Ed in his class. Could not
mm,
keep kids interested in algebra to save his life. The kids just said, I'm never going to use this. They were right. Like, it was a mess. And then at lunch, he's walking around at lunch and he sees these kids playing craps. And he
Hmm.
said, "Oh my gosh, why don't I teach some probability?"
There
And
we
these
go.
kids suddenly say, "Oh my," the kids are on this, right? These
Yeah.
kids who would have failed algebra dismally rose to the challenge with probability because it was actually meaningful to know just how different the probability of an 11 was versus a 7 versus a 4. And you just sort of said, like, make it real. And I think that's what I've done in the book is it's an entire book of math ideas, not equations and formulas, but math ideas that are real, that affect any reader's life, affects their career, their citizenship prospects, their happiness levels, and that they need to know. And I hope I've done it in a way that's understandable and fun and intriguing with, a whole bunch of examples of this is where you will see it. And these are the questions you should be asking to better understand what's coming your way.
Yeah, right on. You did it. You did a great job. Like I said, Ruckus Maker approved aftermath here. So
Excellent.
we want everybody to pick up a copy. I think this is a good spot to take a quick break, get some messages in from our sponsors, and when we come back, I have some more questions about the documentary you put together.
Excellent.
ODP Business Solutions, formerly Office Depot Business Solutions Division, has been a trusted partner for schools for 30 years. At ODP Business Solutions, we're by your side to meet your evolving education needs. Here's the thing about creating remarkable learning spaces. You need a partner who gets it. Someone who understands that transforming education isn't just about swapping whiteboards for smartboards. It's about reimagining what's possible. That's why innovative school leaders trust ODP Business Solutions. We don't just deliver supplies. We help you design dynamic learning environments that make students actually excited to show up. From tech integrations that bring lessons to life to flexible furniture that transforms any space into a collaboration zone, to sustainable solutions that teach by example, we've got everything you need to do school different. And the best part, you can get it all from a single supplier. That helps you simplify ordering and streamline budgeting while staying compliant with easy access to cooperative contracts. However you want to advance, ODP Business Solutions has 30 years of experience helping districts like yours get ahead. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to learn more. That's odpbusiness.com/education. Too many students with the talent to be tomorrow's engineers give up, convinced they're just not good at school. That's why Play Piper was created. The name comes from the mission to repair the leaky STEM pipeline and guide kids back toward discovery and innovation. With hands-on STEM kits and coding curriculum, students who love gaming and tinkering realize they can also succeed in science, engineering, and beyond. If you're an educator looking for a way to boost engagement, bring joy into STEM, and keep your students on the path of innovation, visit playpiper.com to learn more. That's playpiper.com. Something that drove me nuts as a ruckus maker was hearing teachers say things like, I taught it, they should have learned it. But really, some teachers just don't know how to teach or reteach for that matter so that all kids get it. That's where IXL comes in. IXL's diagnostic automatically identifies knowledge gaps for teachers and provides them with a personalized growth plan for each individual student. Teachers can step into the classroom every day knowing what their students know and what they don't know. IXL's adaptive platform makes differentiating instruction easy. As students learn, IXL adjusts to the right level of difficulty for each student. Close knowledge gaps and accelerate learning with IXL. Get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. All right. And we're back with Ted Dintersmith, and we're talking aftermath a lot in the beginning of this conversation. We touched base a bit on the documentary multiple choice and want to dig into that a little bit more too, because a big idea there. It zoomed in and told a story of a school system in Virginia, if I remember correctly, and they they were they've built an innovation center there, which is incredible. They're really invested in CTE and a vocational track for their students. And the thing that really spoke to me so much, because it's in my do school different point of view, how do we reimagine education within a traditional setting so that we create campus experiences worth showing up for? Every student that was a part of that and had the opportunity to tell their story, they wanted to participate in school when school was created in the innovation center program type of way, and they soared. They absolutely soared and are doing amazing stuff as incredibly young adults, where sometimes society says like these guys have no passion or work ethic, or all the kind of complaints that they have for the younger generation. And these kids are not like that at all. They're doing work that matters, and they're fulfilled, and they're interested in contributing. So yeah, I think my first question here, I'd love to ask, why do you think it's so hard to get schools to innovate?
The story of our lives, right? I mean, this
Yeah,
is a
yeah, for
story of
sure.
our lives. I think there are just a set of locked-in factors that impede innovation. You've got college admissions, you've got state-mandated exams, you've got a body of lesson plans, and exams are hard to develop, and so you've got existing exams that get tweaked from year to year, and you get parent expectations, and you've got, I think, largely outdated schools of education that are training teachers to teach, as though we're still in the year 1950. And I think when it's kind of still working, even though this might look like it's way better, I think it's easy to say, yeah, we'll get to that someday. I think today it's becoming crystal clear that the things have come off the rails. And so I'm hopeful, I wish if things weren't coming off the rails, that's for sure, but I'm hopeful that this will put a real oomph behind school innovation, because the reality is, go through school, jump through hoops, 16 years of doing everything right, no job. Within 3 to 5 years, college placement offices, the career services offices on college campuses will be a wasteland. Nobody's going to want to
Mhm.
hire a fresh college grad unless they have pragmatic skills, which you see in this innovation center, or they know how to use AI proficiently, which this school's
Mhm.
leaning into. So you either get out of its way or learn how to use it, or both. And I
Mhm.
think that's an imperative now for a K through 12 system. And I thought what was interesting and what really drew me to doing the film, I mean, documentaries done right, there's no point in doing a mediocre documentary. You either need to step up and make sure it's going to be extraordinary, or don't bother, because people have a million other things they can watch. And I feel like we did that. We met that standard with most likely to succeed, and we meet that standard with multiple choice. But I was not
Mhm.
really thinking I'd ever do a second documentary, because I just like,
Mhm.
it costs a lot of money. You got to fund the documentary, then you got to fund the outreach. I mean, not a modest endeavor. And then I visited this school, and what drew me to it, first you talk to the students. They can't wait to be in this center. But I
Yep.
think the most important thing is, first, it's a mainstream public school. So it's not a school over there that a few parents elect to send their kids to. You might find some schools doing similar things that are kind of options for some families. This is what they're doing in Winchester, Virginia. And it is for all kids. So whether you want to go to college or not, you're going to spend a significant amount of your high school years in the Innovation Center. And you're going to
Mhm.
explore not just one, but multiple careers. And you're going to decide what resonates with your interest and skills. And you're going to be doing internships and apprenticeships and have life coaches coming into that center, helping you understand how this might unfold if you choose to pursue it. And these kids they take off with it. It is real. It's putting pressure on the rest of the school to be more, project based. And I think that's a really good thing. But
Yep.
you visit there and you just feel the energy and the electricity. And and what the film team did, and again, this is where they get the credit. Charles Haine he just knocked the ball out of the park with this film. And we had others. Kim Diltz helped a lot. We had a great team behind this. I just stayed out of the way. That's why it was really good. I can't wait. But the
It's a
student
good
stories,
leadership lesson, right?
yeah,
To
yeah.
build a
The,
great team and get out of their way.
the student stories are knock your socks off. And you
Mm.
see, there's a kid, and we found this out too late to put in it, but one kid in the film, hates school, kind of adrift. It's not going to go well for that kid. Finds in the Innovation Center the Firefighters Academy, connects with one of the firefighters in the community, kind of takes the younger kid under his wing. I get a note. So we show that kid in the film, and you see he just lights up with this. I get a note last month from the superintendent who says, "You won't believe it. This kid just got hired full time by the local fire department. You also won't believe this. The last 2 years of high school, this kid and his mother lived in a car.
Mm.
And now he's got a job so they can afford to live in a building, in a structure." It's like, what?
Yeah.
That's amazing. There's a young woman. I love this one. I mean, I love them all. But there's a young woman named Savannah that's featured in the film. Okay. At the beginning of high school, she thinks she wants to be a lawyer. Why? She had watched Law and Order on TV.
Right,
Got
right,
some
right.
experience, said, I don't want to be a lawyer. Sort of explores healthcare and says, this is really up my alley. And in doing work in the field, realizes I can actually help people as a 17-year-old. So she's off and running, getting her nursing degree in college, which is powerful and fantastic. But we also interview her mother. And her mother shares on film, you'll see her in the film, that her daughter inspired her, the mother, to go back and get her nursing degree. And it's like you realize it's lifting up not just some kids in high school, it's lifting up the entire community. And it's bringing the community together towards an aspirational goal. And it's respecting all paths. And I think that's one of the things we've done miserably in our country, right? Is it's in our films, our commercials, it's just baked in. You're going to college? That's great. Oh, you're not going to college. Oh,
Yeah.
too bad.
Loser.
That's crazy, right? That's crazy. Because actually a lot of these kids are going to pursue great paths, safe from AI, are important contributors to their community. We have another kid who's a welder. He's like off and running once after high school with a great job he enjoys, making serious money. What's wrong with
he felt like outsider, was depressed, like, how do I fit in? And the welding gave him confidence too,
gave him
right?
confidence.
In a way that other classes wouldn't, but it's because he was working with his hands and, becoming a problem solver, all this kind of stuff there. I mean, there's so much to dig into here, but, the cool thing too is by asking all the kids to participate in the Innovation Center experience, some go into the work field and become employed and contribute immediately, welding, firefighting, whatever. And there were a couple stories where I think one kid, he was doing sort of the EMT paramedic track. And he said, I'm enjoying this. It's definitely, I love medicine. I want to be a surgeon though. So it only grew his confidence, and encouraged him to continue on that path. And then there was a female student who was doing the welding too. And then I think she's looking more into like law and policy and that kind of deal. But the unlock for me was when she was talking, she explained being with some friends, looking at a table and saying, I could build that, right?
Yeah.
And maybe even build it better or something.
She would, yeah.
Well, the connection I had, Ted, was you may not know this about me, but I think the coolest thing I ever did in education, I think, was for 3 years, I invited students to run the Chicago Marathon with me. I was teaching at a high school called Brooks College Prep, far south side of Chicago, 130s. It's almost as far as the city goes, right? It's right toward the border. And those students, many of them stay in their neighborhoods. They didn't even visit necessarily the north side, right? So context, and that's really interesting. And I went around to every homeroom and I said, how many of you have saved somebody's life before? And no hands went up. And that's because we were going to fundraise, and we did. We fundraised for clean water projects around the world by running the marathon. And I just thought this would be a compelling story people would get behind, and I was right. We raised over 25,000 in 3 years with these kids. But then the second question I asked is, who needs service learning hours to graduate? And all the hands shot up. And I said, if you run this with me, we will count that towards service learning because we'll be fundraising for these programs for clean water. And it's going to be a hard challenge, right? But you're going to learn something about yourself and we're going to help out a lot of people. Now, where I want to finish is this. I'm at the marathon in Chicago. I'm at the finish line. I'm done. And I'm seeing students come, right? And they're coming through the finish line and they're crying. I'm crying. We're hugging. And 100% of them were saying basically, I never want to do that again, Mr. Bauer. But, and it's a very important but, now I know I can do anything, right? And that's the same thing that girl with the welding experienced. And that's I think our one of our number one jobs maybe, but, inspiring belief in our students that they can do it and giving them skills and challenges that they need to figure it out, but then that translate into every other part of their life, right? And, over 100 kids finished the race in those 3 years. And it was just a tremendous, tremendous experience.
Wow, that's a big number. That's incredible. And you're
Yeah.
right. They give them a challenge that they see as meaningful.
Mm,
And, they make mistakes along the way and it doesn't go well for a while. And if
yeah.
it's a weighted average course, they're going to get it. Well, at most I can get a B minus, but here it's true
Right.
mastery. And I think a point I want to emphasize about that innovation center is, and I've done a lot and tried to influence the way college admissions officers think about applications, but had the welding been optional, selective colleges would ding somebody who took welding instead of another AP course because
Right.
it's expected there. They don't ding them for that. And then these kids write great essays. And when they go to college, those who want to go to college, and about half do, have a far better sense of what they want to major in, what they want to get out of it, and why they want to do it. So it's, I think, even though you think, oh, career-based learning, that's for those kids, all wrong. It's
Yeah.
better for kids whether they plan to go to college or not. And I think the fact that it's bringing the community together and driving local economic growth, that's what gives me a sense that this is a model that every community in America needs to take seriously.
100%. I love what I do. I mean, I like to say I have the best job in the world because the clients, that I support, nobody forced them to work with me and they're hungry and they want to get better as leaders. So I'm really quite lucky. And I love coaching. I love thinking. I love writing. I love reading, these kind of things. So I am really fortunate. But just seeing the very practical need in this community, which I'm sure is representative of the entire country, to get a contractor in the house to do some work and that kind of thing. Like, if I had to quit this tomorrow and become a carpenter or something like that, I think I would be really pretty happy. I know I'd be well employed and doing great in terms of salary or whatever. You know how you want to think about money. But these are they're problems that we have in each community that need solutions. People need to do the work, and it's good work. It's it's honoring work and makes the community better and all this kind of stuff. So it shouldn't be the two tiers. College is the only way, if you go into whatever plumbing, carpentry or whatever, that it's not as good. It's just simply not true.
Not true. They're hard jobs, creative problem solving, interpersonal skills, business finance skills, entrepreneurship. It's like, when did we ever get the idea that these were less challenging jobs than being a philosophy professor? And I have nothing against philosophy professors, but I have everything for kids empowered to explore different options and find their path forward in life. That's what I'm
Yeah.
for.
So my last question regarding your work before the last three questions I ask all my guests. You contrast the death spiral with being the lead ant.
Yes.
Can you unpack that briefly for the audience, and then we'll move on?
There's this curious phenomena in nature. I mean, ants by genetics are programmed to follow the ant in front of them. And so, sometimes if you're hiking in the woods, you'll see long ant trains where they're kind of meandering their way toward their home nest or toward a food source or something. And at times, the lead ants get confused and they start to drift and they end up circling back into the middle or back of the ant train. And suddenly you've got ants following ants that just march and march and march until they all die.
Hmm.
And it's like, I feel like that's a great metaphor for what we do in education. And the power and the interest about that is that any ant can be the lead ant. All you have to do is say, why am I following this ant in front of me going nowhere when I can break off and go somewhere? And I think that's the opportunity we all have. We all can be the lead ant. We don't just have to follow the ant in front of us that's following the ant. Like we don't have to engage in this death march. We can do something different. I think people know what it is, and now it's just bringing the courage to take it on.
Yeah. And that's what ruckus makers are. They're the lead ant. They reject the premise. They don't have to follow, the person in front of them. And yeah, we just encourage you to jump out there and implement your Do School Different vision. So, well, Ted, if you could put one message on all school marquees around the world for a single day, what would your message be?
We are committed to helping your child find their path of purpose.
And if you were building your dream school, you didn't have any limitations in terms of your resources. Your only constraint was your ability to imagine. What would be the 3 guiding principles building your dream school?
Students with agency, skills, not content, meaningful impact.
Right on. We covered a lot of ground today, Ted, and of everything we discussed, what's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
You're changing lives. My daughter teaches. It's a hard job. I have remarkable and deep admiration for people in the field of education. And despite all the frustrations and the ludicrous accountability measures shoved down your throat every day, keep in mind, you are changing lives. Because I've yet to find an adult when I say, who made you the person you are today, that didn't point to some of their teachers.
That's right. Hey, Ruckus Maker, thanks again for pressing play. I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I enjoyed recording it. And before you go, if today's episode shifted something for you, where you want to do school different or you have a new idea about education, then I want to invite you to subscribe to ruckusmakers.news. That's our newsletter. And you get 3 new opportunities to do school different every week sent to your inbox. It's trusted by over 5,000 school leaders. And if you want to reimagine education within a traditional setting so that you could create a campus experience worth showing up for, subscribe for free at ruckusmakers.news.